Okay, this is section 2.2, the answers to the questions from section 2.2 in our Math Links textbook. Thank you, Taya, for following along quietly. We have question 4 is where we started, and it says estimate and calculate. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do the estimation first. And when we have this on the test, we just did a whole sheet of this just a second ago before I pressed record. But we're going to round each of these to the nearest whole number. So when I change 0.98 plus negative 2.91 to the nearest whole number, I get 1 plus negative 3, which means my estimation, my answer should be around negative 2. Now, if I think about how I did this, I really ask myself, what do I have more of? I have more negatives. How many more negatives is the difference between the negatives and the positives, which is actually a subtraction. So technically, I use subtraction, but we're going to do the same thing. We're going to take the negatives, which in this case is 2.91, and we're going to remove from that, or find the difference between that and the positives, which I have less of, and I'm going to subtract them. And when I subtract them, I get 1.93. Now, will that be a positive or a negative? The answer is it'll be negative for two reasons. Because I know I have more negatives, but the second reason is my estimation was negative 2. So since my estimation was negative 2, my calculation is negative 1.93. The second question, B, we're going to round it to 5, take away 3, which of course everybody knows is 2. That's my estimation. Since this is actually a grade 4 question, everybody didn't need to jump to their calculator right away. You can actually just take 5.46, subtract 3.16, you get 0, 3, and 2, 2.30. So then this is the estimation. Your calculation is 2.3. And that's as easy as it gets, that one. Excuse me. Drinking grapefruit pop and I get the hiccups. Question C, I have an estimation of negative 4 plus negative 6, which is going to be a negative 10. If you said positive 10, you're not really thinking about it. You're trying to confuse your multiplication sign rules with your addition. But the estimation is going to be approximately equal to negative 10. Since I'm actually just adding negatives to negatives, I'm actually going to use addition for this. I'm not going to use subtraction. I'm not finding the difference because all I have is negatives. I get 8, I get 9, I get 9. So my calculation is 9.98, my calculation. And finally, my last question is the difference between those two. Most of you have probably said, you know what, enough's enough. I'm just going to use addition of the opposite. And you said to yourself, if I'm estimating, it's going to be negative 1 plus positive 7. And your estimation is going to be approximately positive 6. You're going to take what you have more of, which in this case is positives. You're going to subtract what you have less of, which in this case is negatives. Subtract them. You get 4, 3, and 5. My calculation is positive 5.34. Question 6, exact same thing, except this time we're doing multiplication and division. So our estimation here will be 3 times negative 3, which will mean our estimation will be approximately negative 9. My calculation, I can just line up my 2.7 and multiply it by my 3.2. 2 times 7 is 14, carry your 1. 2 times 2 is 4, plus 1 is 5. 3 times 7 is 21, carry your 2. And that's 8. Add them together. Now, based on your estimation of negative 9, I know that the only answer I can give for the calculation is negative 8.64. Or, old school says 1 decimal place, 2 decimal places, 1, 2, 2 decimal places, 8.64. Question B, division. I have $3.25 and I have to divide it into piles of $2.50. Can I make a pile? Yes, you can. Can you make 2 piles? No, you can't. So your estimation for $3.25 divided into piles of $2.50 is probably like 1.5 maybe. Is it going to be positive or negative? Negative, because you're dividing a negative by a positive. That's my estimation. Grab your calculator for this. 3.25 divided by 2.5. Your actual calculation is negative 1.3. So our estimation was pretty close for B. Right? We weren't too bad for that. Question C. For our estimation, we're going to make it negative 6 times negative 6, which is an estimation of positive 36. We're going to multiply this out a calculator. 5.5 times 5.5, 25, 27. Scroll this down a bit. 25, 27. Add them together. You get 3025. Put your decimal where it needs to be. So your actual calculation is positive 30.25. And our last one for question D, negative $4.37 divided into piles of 95 cents, or $4.35 divided into piles of almost $1. How many piles can you make? 4 and almost a half. So our estimation for D will be a positive 4.5. Right, we're just thinking about it roughly, maybe. Grab our calculator for the calculation. 4.37 divided by 0.95 equals 4.6. Our calculation is 4.6. Question 8 gives us 3 bed mass questions and asks us to evaluate. It doesn't say estimate, so we're just going to calculate this. I'll write down the first one here, negative 2.1 times 3.2 plus 4.3 times negative 1.5. Because we have 3 operations, I'm going to do my multiplication and my multiplication first. I'm not going to do my addition yet. I'm just going to do both of the multiplications. Hold on. Is that yours or is that mine? Sure? Okay. So both of those multiplications are going to be done first with the calculator. 2.1 times 3.2 is 6.72, which I need to make negative because we're doing negative times a positive. So negative 6, negative 6.72. Over here, the other side, grab my calculator again. Bring it over here so I can see it. Bring it up here. 4.3 times 1.5 equals, and that's also going to be a negative because it's a positive times a negative, so negative 6.45. I'm going to keep that in brackets, bring down my addition sign, and now I have a negative 6.72 plus a negative 6.45. I can do that in my head. It's 13 point, I don't want to do it in my head, who am I kidding? 6.72 plus 6.45 is 13.17. Is that negative or positive? Negative, because you're adding negatives to negatives. For question B, I'll erase this part here. For question B, we have negative 3.5 multiplied by 4.8 take away 5.6. So here we actually have a question where we're going to use brackets first. So I'm going to write this down again. Negative 3.5 multiplied by 4.8 take away 5.6. Do our subtraction first. $4.80 take away $5.60 is negative 0.8, I think. And we're going to multiply that by negative 3.5. So 3.5 times 0.8 is going to be is that going to be a negative or a positive 2.8? Not all at once because it gets confusing if you yell at me. But that's right, it is a positive because it's a negative multiplied by a negative. And finally, we have our last question C, which is negative 1.1 multiplied by 2.3 minus negative 0.5. Does anyone know why we're using square brackets here? The reason why we're using square brackets here, well, I'll tell you because everyone seems so interested right now, is because if I used round brackets, I'm just going to take my time erasing this. If I used round brackets right here, it looks confusing because you have 2 round brackets next to each other. So what we do instead is we just use square brackets, just like that. Do the brackets first in bed mass, add those together, you're going to get 2.8. So negative 1.1, change back to round brackets, I don't need square anymore. 2.8. 1.1 times 2.8 should be 3.08, but I'm not 100% sure, so I'm going to use my calculator. 3.0, negative 3.08 is your calculation. Question 10 says, in Regina, Saskatchewan, the average mid-afternoon temperature in January is negative 12.6 degrees Celsius. The average mid-afternoon temperature in July is 26.1. How many degrees colder is Regina in January than July? So what I'm going to do here is I'm actually going to just draw a number line. And I'm going to put the temperatures on. I'm going to put 0 in the middle. And I'm just going to put imaginary numbers here because it doesn't really matter. And I'll put negative 12.6. And then imaginary lines here, 26.1. So if I said how many degrees colder is it in January than July, from the picture standpoint, I kind of see what I'm going to have to do here. What do I have to do here to get that answer? How many different degrees? I'm going to have to add those two together, right? So really what I'm doing here is 26.1. I'm actually finding the difference between the high and the low, the difference between it, which actually means subtraction. But if we think about this, if I'm subtracting the difference between the high and the low, I'm going to keep flip change, and really what I'm doing is adding those together. And I'm going to get 38.7 degrees. So it's 38.7 degrees hotter in July than it is in January, or vice versa, colder. Question 11 says, one January day in Penticton, British Columbia, the temperature read negative 6.3 degrees Celsius at 10 o'clock in the morning and 1.4 degrees Celsius at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. What was the change in temperature? So again, I'm going to draw a number line just to show you. Negative 6.3 and 1.4. If I'm looking for the difference in temperature, the difference in the high, difference being subtraction, the difference between the high and the low will actually be the sum of those two, which will mean the difference is 7.7 degrees Celsius difference. Okay. What was the average rate of temperature? So if it changed 7.7 degrees and it started at 10 a.m. and it finished at 3 p.m., then 11 a.m., 12 p.m., 1, 2, and 3, that's 5 hours. So I'm going to take this answer and I'm going to divide by 5. So if I think of this B question as a bedmass question, the difference in temperature, what did I want to then take that, whatever that difference is, and I want to take that number and divide it by the 5 hours. So if I think of that as a bedmass question, that's what it looks like. The difference in temperature divided by the 5 hours, or 7.7 degrees divided by the 5 hours. 7.7 degrees divided by the 5 hours means the average rate of temperature, it was 1.54 degrees Celsius. It was going up by 1.54 degrees Celsius every hour for those 7.7 degrees for those 5 hours. In a nutshell, to be able to create this I'll just do it again, this one right here, from this information, that is a true academic creation, right? If you're having difficulty with math, you might not be able to do that, but if you have aspirations to kind of go on to high school and be academic, that's something you need to keep in mind of being able to do, writing it as a bedmass question and solving it to get an answer. Question 12. Just 1 second here, I'll make this smaller. Question 12 says a pelican dives vertically from a height of 3.8 meters above sea level. So I'm going to try drawing a picture. There's the seagull. And it dives 3.8 meters to the water. And it catches a fish that is 2.3 meters underwater, which I'm going to represent with negative 2.3 meters. It says you write an expression using irrational numbers to represent the length of the pelican's dive. So we're looking from the length of the pelican's dive, or the positive height it started at, the difference between that height and the negative height underwater will be the total difference, total distance, which is 6.1 meters. So the pelican's total height was 6.1 meters. This is your expression. This is your answer. Question 13 says a submarine was cruising at a depth of 153 meters underwater. So first question, there's the picture of the submarine. It's at minus 153 meters. It then rose at a rate of 4.5 meters per minute for 15 minutes. So it went up 4.5 meters per minute for 15 minutes. What was the submarine's depth at the end of this rise? So this is the important part. I'm going to make a bedmass question for A. So our starting depth is negative 153. So if I think about it in words, where it started plus how much it rose equals where it is now, right? If I think of it in simple terms of where it started plus how much it rose equals where it is now. So where it started is minus 153 below water plus how much it rose. Now if it rose 4.5 meters for 15 minutes, we're going to use a positive 4.5, meaning going up, multiplied by 15 minutes. Right? If it was 10 minutes, it would have went up 45 meters. If it was 15, yada, yada. So that is the bed mass question we're going to use. We're going to solve it using order of operations. 4.5 meters times 15 is 67 and a half. So if we think about that, that means that submarine rose 67 and a half meters. So if we combine its initial depth with that raising of 67 and a half meters, taking a calculator, 153, I'm going to make that negative, combined with 67 and a half means the current depth is 85.5 meters underwater. So it's now only 85.5 meters underwater. Okay. Now B is kind of complex. If it continues to rise at the same amount of 4.5 meters per minute, 4.5 meters per minute, how long will it take to rise the entire remainder of the depth? So if we think about that, let's make a simpler question. If it is 10 meters underwater and it rises at 2 meters per minute, how many minutes will it take to get to the surface? It's a simpler question. Hankinson, how long? 5 minutes. So if I take the depth and divide it by the rate at which it rises, that will tell me how many minutes it takes, correct? So we apply that logic from a simpler question to our slightly more complex question. It needs to rise negative 85.5 meters, and we don't really need the negative because that's just the distance it needs. It's not really negative. Divided by the rate at which it rises, 4.5 meters. 85, oh, that's not the right button. Clear. 85.5 meters divided by the rate at which it rises means that it will take 19 minutes. It'll take 19 minutes at 4.5 meters per minute to raise the extra 85.5 meters to the surface. Question 14 says SATA owned 125 shares of an oil company. One day the value of each of those shares dropped by 31 cents. The next day each of those shares rose by 18 cents. What was the overall change of shares in those 2 days? So if I think about 125 of anything, if they all rose $2, I would take that and multiply it by $2, and that would tell me how much it rose over the one day. 125 shares rising by $2. But we're not talking $2. We're actually talking falling by 31 cents. So how am I going to represent a falling of 31 cents, Gavin? What will a falling of 31 cents look like? What do you think, Hankinson? What do you think, Isaiah? Falling 31 cents. Yeah, that's right. Negative 0.31. So if all 125 shares drop 31 cents, that's what it looks like mathematically. That's day one. Day two, so if I have day one plus whatever happened to those 125 shares in day two they went up or they rose by 18 cents, which means we're going to use a positive 0.18. So how far it dropped in day one would be a negative expression, and or combined with how much it rose in day two. 125 shares increasing by or decreasing by 31 cents means it dropped negative $38.75 in the first day. And in the second day, those 125 shares went up by 18 cents. It went up by $22.50 in day two. So as we can see before we actually do the math, after 2 days, the stocks are still down. But we take the 38.75, which is negative, combine it with the 22.50, and we get negative $16.25. That's the value of her stocks after 2 days. And finally, the last question we had to do says determine the mean. And of course, mean, what do I mean by mean? I mean the average, right? The average. That's the math word for average of the set of numbers. In order to get the average, you need to add all of the numbers together. Running out of space here. And what do I do with all 7 of those numbers once I add them to find the average? Divide by what? Number of terms, in this case 7. So since there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, once I get the answer to that, I'm going to take that whole thing and divide it by 7. Or if you wanted to, instead of doing it that way, you could have just did in brackets, shrink it down because it's too big. Once you have it in brackets, divide by 7. Either way works. It doesn't matter. This is fine. Take your calculator, find the sum. Someone want to read off the numbers for me? 0 plus anybody? Negative 4.5 plus negative 8 point what? 2? 8.2 negative, okay. Plus positive plus 7.6 negative plus 3.5 plus 0.2 equals, is that all 7? Equals 16.6 divided by 7. Is that right? Is that the answer everyone got? Okay, so what are we going to say there? We're going to say roughly negative 2.4 degrees. Therefore, negative 2.4, I'm going to use approximately equal to negative 2.4 degrees. Or no, just negative 2.4. Approximately the average of those numbers is 2.4. With B, we only have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So we're going to go in brackets 6.3 plus negative 2.2 plus 14.9 plus negative 4.8 plus negative 5.3 plus 1.6. End brackets divided by what number this time? 6. All right, let's see if I can remember this. Am I that good? Can I remember this without seeing it? 6.3 plus 2.2 negatives plus 14.9 plus 4.8 negative plus 5.3 negative plus 1.6 equals divided by 6 equals. Is that right? I'm the most amazing person that ever lived. So therefore, your average temperature is 1 point, or not temperature, average number for that, the mean, the average, is 1.75.